Derrick Coleman won Rookie of the Year, became an All-Star, and earned All-NBA honors twice. That is not the resume of a failed career. Yet history remembers him through a harsher word: disappointment. The argument did not begin on one of his worst nights. It began because his best basketball looked almost limitless. On May 9, 1993, the New Jersey Nets entered a deciding playoff game in Cleveland with their season reduced to 48 minutes. Coleman played every one of them. He scored 33 points, collected 16 rebounds, and blocked 2 shots. New Jersey still lost, but he left behind a 5-game series average of 26.8 points, 13.4 rebounds, and 4.6 assists. That series is the most revealing evidence in his career. It shows why the first pick in the 1990 draft was compared with the best power forwards alive, and why the debate around him never ended. Once people had watched Coleman control a playoff series in that many ways, every quieter night looked less like normal variation and more like something being withheld. A line later published in a Sports Illustrated draft retrospective supplied the brutal shorthand. Coleman could have been the best power forward ever. Instead, he played just well enough to ensure his next paycheck. The sentence survived because it turned talent into an accusation. It did not say Coleman lacked ability. It argued that he possessed historic ability and chose not to use enough of it. The numbers make it impossible to call him a conventional bust. His finest performances make it difficult to accept those numbers as the full measure of what was available. Injuries, an irregular heartbeat, unstable teams, public confrontations, and questions about his preparation all entered the distance between those conclusions. Before his 6th season was 2 months old, the same franchise that drafted him first would decide that it could no longer build around him. Some of the criticism was supported by Coleman's own choices. Some of the interruptions were documented medical problems. And eventually the reputation became so powerful that the explanation often arrived before the evidence. To understand how a productive star became a symbol of unrealized potential, the story has to begin in Detroit, with a player whose number would one day hang from the rafters at Syracuse. Derrick Demetrius Coleman was born on the 21st of June, 1967, in Mobile, Alabama. His family moved north while he was still a child, and his basketball identity developed in Detroit. Northern High School became the first place where his unusual combination of size and coordination attracted national attention. At Northern High School, Coleman's size was only the first thing opponents had to solve. He was already comfortable catching away from the basket, putting the ball on the floor, and passing over smaller defenders. In the 1986 McDonald's All-American game, he finished with 19 points and 15 rebounds. He was not emerging from Detroit as an unfinished body. He was one of the most accomplished high school forwards in the country. The city also gave him an unusually close view of professional standards. Coleman later recalled being able to visit practices of the Detroit Pistons team that was developing into a champion. The contrast mattered. On one side was a teenager whose game appeared almost effortless. On the other were professionals building an identity through repetition, defense, and accountability. Years later, debates about Coleman's own preparation would make those early visits feel like more than a hometown detail. What separated him from most power prospects was the number of ways he could influence a possession. He could establish position on the block, face a defender, rebound outside his area, lead a break, or find a cutter. At roughly 6'10" and left-handed, he presented angles that conventional power forwards did not. The physical advantage was obvious. The skill underneath it was what made coaches imagine an entirely new kind of front-court player. Detroit would eventually become the place to which his playing career and his life after basketball returned. But before that circle could close, Coleman left Northern High School for Syracuse, where his first college season ended one possession from a national championship. By the time Coleman left Detroit for a college campus in upstate New York, he was already a national prospect. At Syracuse, that promise would become a 4-year statistical record. Derrick Coleman arrived at Syracuse for the 1986-87 season and stayed through 1990. His freshman year immediately placed him inside one of the most painful endings in school history. Syracuse reached the national championship game against Indiana, led by 1 point in the closing seconds, and lost when Keith Smart made the deciding jumper. Coleman collected 19 rebounds in that game. Before he had completed one college season, he had already shown that his production would survive the largest stage available. The next 3 years converted that first impression into a record. Coleman became a first-team All-Big East selection as a sophomore, repeated it as a junior, and won Big East Player of the Year as a senior. Remaining for 4 seasons allowed his game to become more than a collection of physical advantages. He learned the conference's contact, saw defenses designed specifically for him, and became a more patient passer from the front court. The numbers he left at Syracuse placed him in a category of his own. Coleman finished with 2,143 points, 1,537 rebounds, and 319 blocked shots. His rebounding total was recognized as the NCAA career record at the time, and he also left as Syracuse's career scoring leader. That combination described more than durability. It showed elite production in several dimensions across 4 complete seasons. Jim Boeheim later said that no player in Syracuse basketball history had made a greater impact than Coleman. The judgment was supported by 4 seasons of production rather than nostalgia for a brief peak. On March 5, 2006, Syracuse retired number 44 and raised it into the Carrier Dome rafters. By the spring of 1990, Coleman's college career had placed him at the top of the NBA draft board. The New Jersey Nets held the first overall selection after winning only 17 games. They used it on Derrick Coleman. New Jersey was not selecting one missing piece for an established roster. The franchise needed a foundation, an offensive identity, and a reason for supporters to believe that years near the bottom could end. Coleman arrived as all 3 before playing a professional minute. His development would be judged alongside the direction of the organization itself. The comparisons started immediately, and they were not modus aid. Coleman's size, strength, and touch invited references to Karl Malone and Charles Barkley. Then came the part that made the projection even more ambitious. Coleman could play beyond the standard map of the position. The visual evidence was easy to understand. After collecting a defensive rebound, he did not always need to search for a guard. He could advance the ball himself, cross half court under control, and make the first pass of the offense. On the left block, his dominant hand changed the defender's angles. Face him with a slower big man, and he could put the ball down, send help, and he could see the cutter arriving behind it. Coleman would later call himself the original stretch 4. The phrase is cleaner than the reality. His three-point percentage fluctuated, and outside shooting was never the foundation of his scoring. But the larger point holds. In 1990, offenses did not routinely ask their largest forward to rebound, handle in transition, create from the perimeter, and still do the traditional work around the rim. That range made him exciting to watch and difficult to grade. A specialist could be judged by one assignment. Coleman appeared to possess an answer for nearly every problem: strength for the glass, touch for scoring, vision for a stalled defense, and enough mobility to attack a mismatch. When New Jersey remained ordinary, observers did not see a missing tool. They saw a player who seemed to own the tool and had not used it often enough. Even the ease in his game became double-edged. Coleman rarely looked frantic. A left-handed turn, one hard dribble, and a soft finish could make difficult work appear casual. When it succeeded, that calm read as control. When it did not, the same posture could be interpreted as detachment. Long before the public knew anything about his habits, his body language was already being asked to testify about them. Coleman's rookie year did not settle that distant argument, but it proved that the immediate foundation was real. Rather than spending a season adjusting quietly, he produced from the opening stage of his career. In the 1990-91 season, Coleman averaged 18.4 points, 10.3 rebounds, and 1.3 blocks per game. Nearly 19 points and better than 10 rebounds as a rookie on a struggling team already treating him as its foundation represented immediate star-level production. He was named to the NBA All-Rookie First Team and won the 1991 Rookie of the Year award. The rookie season gave those projections legitimate evidence. Coleman's size translated against professional frontcourts, his scoring survived increased physicality, and his rebounding remained dependable across the schedule. New Jersey was still far from contention, but its most important question had been answered. The player chosen first could support the weight of an NBA offense immediately. The remaining question concerned how high he could take it. The award solved one question and quietly created another. Coleman had not merely survived the jump from Syracuse, he had made professional production look immediate. From then on, improvement would not be measured against an ordinary rookie curve. 19-10 became the floor from which people began imagining 20-11 playoff victories and eventually a place beside the stars used to describe him on draft night. Individual production had been established. The next test was whether New Jersey could build a functioning team around it. By the 1991-92 season, Coleman had moved close to 20 points and 10 rebounds a night. New Jersey improved by 14 victories and reached the playoffs for the first time since 1986. The roster was beginning to make sense around him. Kenny Anderson could create from the point, Chris Morris supplied athleticism on the wing, Mookie Blaylock pressured opposing guards, and Dražen Petrovic provided fearless perimeter scoring. The first postseason trip ended against Cleveland, but it changed the scale of the project. New Jersey was no longer asking whether Coleman could produce respectable numbers on a losing team. The organization could now ask whether a young core built around him might become a consistent threat in the East. Coleman averaged 19.8 points, 9.5 rebounds, and 3.2 assists during that first-round series. Cleveland won 3-1, and New Jersey never seriously threatened the conference hierarchy. Even so, the performance showed that his regular season production did not vanish when the opponent could prepare for him across several games. The distinction between the first Cleveland series and the rematch 1 year later measures his growth. In 1992, Coleman was a productive young star experiencing the postseason. In 1993, he forced the series to a deciding fifth game while averaging almost 7 additional points and 4 additional rebounds. The ceiling was becoming visible through progression rather than one isolated night. That summer, the Nets hired Chuck Daly, who had coached the Detroit Pistons to 2 championships and had just led the United States Olympic team. Daly understood both the city that had raised Coleman and the demands attached to talented players. Under him, New Jersey improved to 43 victories and returned to the playoffs in 1992-93. On January 15th of that season, the entire scouting report appeared in one box score. Coleman recorded 21 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists, 5 steals, and 5 blocks. It was a 5x5, at least 5 in every major counting category. The achievement is rare on its own. Coleman's version also cleared 20 points and 10 rebounds, a combination reached by only a handful of players in the NBA's recorded steals and blocks era. Hakeem Olajuwon, Draymond Green, and Victor Wembanyama are the other names attached to that particular threshold. The line matters for more than trivia. A block can come from size and a rebound from position, but 7 assists and 5 steals demand a broader reading of the floor. On one night, Coleman performed jobs usually divided among several players: interior scorer, defensive rebounder, secondary creator, passing lane defender, and rim protector. The pieces had not yet produced a long postseason run, but the direction looked credible. A championship coach, a gifted point guard, an elite shooter, and a #1 pick approaching his prime. Their second consecutive playoff appearance was supposed to confirm a beginning, not mark the most promising version of a future that would soon come apart. Against Cleveland, Coleman produced the clearest sustained evidence of the superstar New Jersey believed it had drafted. Cleveland had 5 games to study New Jersey's primary option and force the ball away from him. Coleman still averaged 45 minutes and shot better than 53% from the floor. His production expanded instead of shrinking. 26.8 points, 13.4 rebounds, and 4.6 assists per game. The final game gave the numbers a pulse. Coleman had only 8 points in the first half, then scored 25 after the break and never left the floor. Cleveland answered with Brad Daugherty producing 24 points, 20 rebounds, and 8 assists. Coleman was not beaten because the moment exposed him. Another gifted big man, and the deeper team simply produced more. New Jersey lost 99-89, but the series changed the way its star would be judged. For 5 games, the projection stopped being theoretical. Coleman had faced a defense preparing specifically for him and played at the level of the elite forwards to whom he had been compared. The defeat ended the season. The performance established the reference point that would follow him through the rest of his career. In June of 1993, Dražen Petrović died in a car accident in Germany. New Jersey lost its leading perimeter scorer and one of the emotional engines of the roster. The effect could not be represented only by replacing 22 points per game. A young team that had begun to understand its hierarchy lost a central player and a teammate before the next season could begin. Coleman entered the 1993-94 season, carrying both the evidence of his playoff breakthrough and greater responsibility inside a reshaped offense. It became the highest complete season of his NBA career. Nothing about the season felt like an ending while it was happening. Coleman was 26, the Nets were returning to the playoffs, and the individual honors were accumulating. The reasonable assumption was that this level represented the beginning of his prime, rather than its final uninterrupted expression. Coleman averaged 20.2 points, 11.3 rebounds, and 1.8 blocks. It was his second consecutive season above 20 points and 10 rebounds, and the Nets reached the playoffs for a 3rd straight year. The previous season had not been an isolated surge. Coleman was now the central front court presence on a legitimate playoff team. The honors confirmed the production. Coleman and Kenny Anderson became the first Nets teammates elected to start the same All-Star game. Coleman also made the All-NBA 3rd team for a 2nd consecutive season. A franchise recently searching for relevance now had 2 young All-Star starters, and the league had twice recognized its power forward as one of the best at his position. The All-Star selection mattered to Coleman in a personal way that the public caricature often missed. He later recalled setting goals for himself before each season and keeping them in his locker. After believing he had been overlooked in favor of Cleveland's Larry Nance, he carried an extra edge into those matchups. Starting the game beside Anderson was not an honor he stumbled into. It was one he had written down, pursued, and finally reached with the teammate who knew how to find him. New Jersey reinforced that belief with a 5-year contract extension worth $37.5 million. The agreement was designed to secure Coleman's prime and preserve the player around whom the roster had been constructed. It also changed the language of every later disagreement. Preparation was no longer discussed only as the responsibility of a former number 1 pick. It was measured against the salary of a franchise centerpiece. That financial frame would remain attached to him long after the contract itself stopped being remarkable. When critics later accused Coleman of doing enough to secure the next paycheck, the force of the line depended on the distance between a major commitment and a team that was moving backward. Money did not create the basketball problem, but it made the disappointment easier to personalize. In the spring of 1994, the comparisons no longer looked unreasonable, and the number 1 pick looked fully justified. If his career had been evaluated at that moment, the verdict would have been uncomplicated success. This was the version of Coleman that made every comparison sound plausible. Barkley created offense with speed and force. Malone punished teams through relentless execution. Coleman offered another combination: left-handed touch, front-court passing, rebounding strength, and enough perimeter comfort to anticipate a style that would become more common years later. The 5x5 was no longer a detour into an earlier season. It was part of the evidence that had carried him to this peak. The international game reinforced his standing. In 1994, Coleman represented the United States at the FIBA World Championship as part of the roster commonly known as Dream Team 2. The Americans won the gold medal, placing him among the generation of established NBA players selected to follow the original Olympic Dream Team. By the summer of 1994, the case for Coleman's ceiling rested on several independent forms of evidence: consecutive All-NBA selections, an All-Star start, 20 and 10 production, an exceptional playoff series, a historically balanced single-game line, and a gold medal. The question was no longer whether he possessed elite ability. It was whether that ability would become a stable identity. At his highest point, an All-Star, a gold medalist, and a name beside Olajuwon in the record book, another account of Coleman was already forming. This one was not built from statistics. It was built from missed practices, confrontations, and moments that appeared to confirm the fear that his natural ability mattered more to him than the daily obligations surrounding it. The reputation did not appear from nothing. During the 1993-94 season, reports noted that Coleman had missed more than one informal practice. When Kenny Anderson missed a workout and later apologized, Coleman dismissed the episode with 3 words that became famous in New Jersey: "Whoop-de-damn-do." He was defending a teammate, but the phrase sounded like indifference to the standards a contender was trying to establish. After Chuck Daly left, the relationship between Coleman and the organization deteriorated more visibly. New coach Butch Beard attempted to impose rules on a team whose young stars had acquired considerable power. Coleman challenged the dress code and reportedly asked whether he could simply write checks in advance for the fines. He later requested a trade. None of those incidents proves that he failed to work on his game, but together they supplied specific material for a reputation that is sometimes described too vaguely. Daly later offered an even harsher assessment, saying that Coleman did not enjoy playing basketball. The judgment carries weight because it came from a championship coach, but it also contains a contradiction. Coleman's 2 seasons under Daly produced both of his All-NBA selections and the only All-Star appearance of his career. The coach had seen the resistance. He had also coached the most sustained version of the star everyone wanted Coleman to become. There was also a basketball context that the label could erase. Petrovic was gone. Daly left after 2 seasons. Anderson missed substantial time, and Coleman himself missed 26 games in 1994-95 with assorted injuries. The Nets fell from 45 victories to 30. A collapsing team can expose a star's leadership, but it can also make every weakness look like the single cause of a decline that has several authors. Even inside that lost season, Coleman could produce nights that reopened every expectation. On March 15, 1995, New Jersey faced an Orlando team already bound for 60 victories and the NBA Finals. Coleman scored 36 points, took 11 rebounds, and led the Nets to a 108-99 victory. The opponent made the performance difficult to dismiss. Orlando had Shaquille O'Neal controlling the paint and Penny Hardaway directing one of the league's most explosive attacks. New Jersey was moving in the opposite direction, yet Coleman could still become the best front court player on the floor for an evening and change the game against a contender. For most stars, 36-11 during a disappointing season would function as reassurance. For Coleman, it also deepened the suspicion. The performance reminded observers that the gifts had not disappeared, so the surrounding losses felt harder to explain. His best basketball continued to work in 2 directions. It protected his value while increasing the frustration attached to everything around it. This distinction matters because injury and indifference are not the same explanation. Coleman could be late, confrontational, or resistant to authority and still have genuine physical limitations. Once the public had chosen the simpler version, limitless talent held back by insufficient desire, every absence seemed to confirm it, regardless of the medical record. The criticism grew heavier in 1995 after Coleman was reported to have directed a racially charged insult at Karl Malone during a game. The remark became public and was widely condemned. Coming from a player already described as difficult, it was absorbed into the existing story rather than treated as an isolated loss of judgment. By then, the conversation around Coleman had changed. People were no longer asking only whether he could lead the Nets beyond the first round. They were asking whether the franchise could continue building around him at all. Coleman had requested a move, management had lost confidence in the partnership, and its franchise centerpiece was approaching the exit while still in his 20s. In late 1995, the Nets made that exit official. In 1995, the New Jersey Nets moved on from Derrick Coleman. They sent him, along with Rex Walters and Sean Higgins, to the Philadelphia 76ers. In return, they got Sean Bradley, Tim Perry, and Greg Graham. New Jersey was trading the player around whom it had built the roster. A forward still in his 20s who had averaged nearly 20 points and 11 rebounds for the franchise, produced an exceptional playoff series, and helped reach the postseason 3 consecutive years. Moving that level of talent showed that the relationship had broken beyond what another coaching adjustment could repair. The trade also ended the most plausible, competitive window of Coleman's New Jersey career. A few years earlier, the Nets had possessed a rising core and a championship coach. Petrovic's death, injuries, coaching change, and internal conflict removed those pieces in stages. Trading Coleman closed the project rather than pausing it for another adjustment. For Philadelphia, the trade was a wager on the New Jersey version of Coleman, the 20-10 force who had already made 2 All-NBA TMs. But the medical uncertainty did not begin after the deal. During training camp with the Nets, doctors detected an irregular heartbeat. Coleman was placed on medication, restricted to conditioning work, and kept out while specialists monitored the problem. He had only recently returned to practice when the trade was completed. The diagnosis changes the meaning of what followed. Coleman appeared in only 11 games for Philadelphia during the 1995-96 season, averaging 11.2 points and 6.5 rebounds. That was not an unexplained disappearance, and it was not merely a player arriving out of shape. A heart rhythm problem had interrupted the season before his new team could discover what it had acquired. The medical chronology is essential because the public language around Coleman rarely allowed uncertainty. Missed games were easily folded into the established account of poor preparation. A documented heart condition demanded a more complicated reading. The franchise gamble failed immediately, but not for the reason his reputation encouraged people to assume. He returned in 1996, 97, and averaged 18.1 points and 10.1 rebounds across 57 games. Philadelphia now had rookie Allen Iverson and Jerry Stackhouse commanding possessions on the perimeter, so Coleman was no longer simply recreating his role in New Jersey. He had to score inside a younger, guard-driven offense while remaining the team's most reliable rebounder. The following season brought another interruption when the irregular heartbeat returned. Coleman underwent electrical cardioversion to restore a normal rhythm and waited for blood-thinning medication to clear before doctors allowed him back on the floor. A later profile described marks on his chest from having his heart shocked back into rhythm 3 times. Behind the vague transaction page word conditioning was a physical record that could not be dismissed as attitude. He still played 59 games and again averaged close to 18 points and 10 rebounds. Those seasons are difficult to fit into either popular verdict. They were too productive to represent collapse and too fragmented to restore the trajectory of 1994. Coleman could still produce like a leading front court scorer, but availability had become part of every evaluation. The distance between his best games and a full season was no longer theoretical. The public version of Coleman was loud because his confrontations supplied memorable lines. Away from those moments, profiles found a more private figure, an introvert who read about Black history and passed books to teammates. That detail does not cancel a missed workout or repair a damaged relationship. It does show how much of a person disappears when an entire career is reduced to one phrase about effort. By the end of the decade, the player once compared with Malone and Barkley was moving again, this time to Charlotte, where the argument over his body and his commitment would become almost impossible to separate. Coleman joined the Charlotte Hornets during the lockout-shortened 1998-99 season. The change in status was real. Charlotte did not present him as the beginning of a franchise, but as an experienced front-court scorer who might stabilize a team built around other priorities. He responded with useful basketball rather than a ceremonial decline. In 1999-2000, Coleman became Charlotte's second leading scorer at 16.7 points per game and led the team with 8.5 rebounds. The numbers were below his New Jersey peak, but they were not the numbers of a player surviving on reputation. At 32, he remained a substantial part of an NBA offense. Then the old medical problem returned, and with it came the most revealing collision between Coleman's body and his public image. He was unable to practice while being treated for an irregular heartbeat. Charlotte placed him on the injured list and described the reason as a lack of physical conditioning. To many observers, the wording sounded like confirmation of everything they already believed about him. Coleman publicly objected. He said he had continued working every day while doctors restricted what he could do and rejected the image of a player simply eating his way out of shape. He later worked with a personal trainer and lost significant weight before returning. The episode does not erase earlier conflicts, but it demonstrates how quickly a medical absence could be translated into a character judgment once his reputation had hardened. His final Charlotte season reflected the Cosset Coleman moved to the bench and averaged 8.1 points and 5.4 rebounds. For the first time, reduced production was no longer a temporary dip inside a star's career. It was the new scale of his role. Philadelphia brought him back in a three-team trade before the 2001-2 season. This was not a reunion with the franchise savior imagined 6 years earlier. The defending Eastern Conference champions needed size and scoring around Allen Iverson, and Coleman was being asked to make an older body useful inside somebody else's team. He did more than fill a roster spot. Coleman started all 58 games he played, averaged 15.1 points and 8.8 rebounds, and remained on the floor for nearly 36 minutes a night. Philadelphia lost to Boston in the first round, but the season proved that the veteran version could still carry meaningful responsibility. 1 year later, he produced 13.6 points and 8 rebounds across 12 playoff games as the 76ers defeated New Orleans and pushed Detroit to 6 games in the conference semifinals. It was not the postseason dominance of 1993. It was something different. An aging forward, years removed from all NBA recognition, still finding ways to matter in May. The tactical demands had changed with him. Philadelphia did not need Coleman to initiate every important possession. Iverson supplied the pressure, while Coleman could screen, occupy a defender on the block, move the ball to the weak side, and punish a matchup when the defense tilted too far toward the guard. His perimeter touch created space, and his size still required attention around the glass. He averaged more than 37 minutes during that 2003 playoff run. Coaches do not give that workload to a decorative veteran. They trusted him to survive half-court possessions against teams built to force Iverson's supporting cast into decisions. The older Coleman could no longer dominate through the same volume or mobility, but he had become more useful without needing the offense to confirm his status every trip. That adaptation is often missing from summaries of his career. The popular version jumps from the All-NBA Nets directly to decline, as though everything after the peak were evidence of surrender. The actual record includes a veteran who returned from repeated health problems, accepted smaller roles, and still started meaningful playoff games more than a decade after being drafted. The late career therefore contained more than a sequence of transactions. Coleman had moved from franchise centerpiece to secondary scorer, from secondary scorer to reserve, and then back into a playoff starting lineup. The talent had not disappeared. Its expression kept changing while the old verdict followed him from city to city. In 2004, the road finally led back to Detroit. Coleman and Amal McCaskill were traded to the Detroit Pistons for Corliss Williamson. The transaction returned him to the city where he had attended Northern High School and watched the emerging bad boys practice, but the symmetry was more meaningful than the basketball. Detroit was chasing immediate contention, and Coleman's body no longer allowed him to occupy a dependable place in the rotation. He was on the roster during the November 2004 confrontation between the Pistons and Indiana Pacers. Coleman was not a central participant. He received a one-game suspension for leaving the bench and moving toward the incident near the scorer's table. In the context of his career, it was a minor and unfortunate footnote rather than the defining event of his homecoming. In January of 2005, the Pistons released him. A career that began with Coleman as the first player selected in a draft ended quietly in the middle of a season, in the same city where his game had first attracted national attention. There was no farewell tour and no final postseason possession, only the administrative end of 15 years spent moving between genuine accomplishment and the demand for something larger. The final accounting, therefore, has to separate two questions: what Coleman actually produced and why the production never ended, the disappointment surrounding him. Set the reputation aside, and the career arithmetic establishes a clear baseline. Across every team and role, Coleman's production does not resemble that of a conventional draft failure. Across 781 regular season games, Coleman averaged 16.5 points, 9.3 rebounds, and 2.5 assists. His postseason averages remained similar: 16.8 points, 9.9 rebounds, and 2.8 assists across 39 games. The decline at the end lowered the career line, but it did not erase the duration of his front court production. Broader measures point in the same direction. His career player efficiency rating was 18.0, above the league baseline of 15, and he accumulated 64.3 win shares. Neither statistic can decide a legacy or measure leadership, but both reject the idea that his career consisted only of empty reputation. Coleman remained a productive NBA player across multiple roles and physical versions. The honors reinforce the same conclusion: Rookie of the Year, an All-Star selection, 2 All-NBA third-team appearances, consensus, first-team All-American, Big East Player of the Year, a FIBA World Championship gold medal, more than $80 million in reported NBA salary. Detached from the name and its reputation, that resume describes a substantial star. Despite that record, Coleman later appeared at number 17 in a Sports Illustrated online gallery titled NBA Draft Busts. The contradiction forces the question at the center of his legacy. How does a Rookie of the Year, an All-Star, a 2-time All-NBA forward, and a gold medalist enter the same vocabulary as players who never established NBA careers? The answer is not statistical failure. It is the gap between his actual production and the larger career already written for him in the public imagination. Coleman's life after basketball complicated the paycheck line in a different way. He became a developer and entrepreneur, directing money toward businesses and real estate projects in Detroit. One of the ventures, Coleman's Corner, was intended to bring commercial activity into a neglected neighborhood. He also remained connected to basketball through occasional work as an analyst on NBA TV. The second act did not move in a straight line. In 2010, Coleman filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection, listing approximately $4.7 million in debt and about $1 million in assets. His attorney said investments intended to create jobs and revive business opportunities in Detroit had become unsustainable during the collapse of the real estate market. That episode resists an easy moral almost as strongly as his basketball career does. It is possible to view the bankruptcy as another case of resources not producing the expected result. It is also important to recognize what some of those resources were being used to attempt. Coleman had not simply spent his post-career years avoiding the city that raised him. He had placed money into projects whose failure carried a real personal cost. Years later, during the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, Coleman responded more directly. Reporting in 2016 described him driving roughly 65 miles to deliver bottled water and eating utensils to residents who could not trust the water in their homes. The work was practical rather than symbolic. Acquire supplies, load vehicles, make the trip, and distribute what people needed. Flint does not retroactively settle every argument about a missed practice or a quiet game. Community work and professional preparation are different questions, and using one to erase the other would be too convenient. What it does reveal is the limitation of the caricature. A man remembered as unwilling to exert himself could also commit time, travel, and labor when no contract or box score rewarded it. That contradiction belongs in the final accounting. Coleman could be resistant, proud, and difficult. He could also be loyal to a place, willing to invest in it, and present when another Michigan community needed help. The person was always larger than the scouting verdict. Returned to Cleveland in May of 1993. Coleman has played every second of an elimination game. He scored only 8 points before halftime, then answered with 25 in the second half. He finishes with 33 points and 16 rebounds, the performance expected from a franchise player when a season is closing. The Nets lose anyway. The scene refuses to deliver an easy verdict. Coleman did not shrink from the moment, and he did not save the team from it. His 5-game series proves that he could expand under playoff pressure. It cannot prove that he would have matched Barkley or Malone across a decade. The evidence establishes the size of the possibility, not the certainty of the imagined future. Part of that future was interrupted by events outside his control. Petrovic died just as the Nets were becoming credible. Coaches changed, injuries broke continuity, and a heart rhythm condition disrupted multiple seasons. Another part belonged to Coleman himself: missed workouts, public confrontations, resistance to team rules, and responses that made the harshest interpretation easier to believe. A fair judgment has to keep those categories separate without pretending either one is small. Treating every criticism as invention turns Coleman into a victim of other people's expectations. Treating every medical interruption as evidence of indifference turns him into a caricature. Neither explains a career that lasted 781 games and still produced useful playoff basketball long after the All-Star years had passed. The deeper mistake is to grade an actual career against a flawless version of the same player who never existed. That imaginary Coleman never lost Petrovic, never developed an irregular heartbeat, never challenged a coach, and never played an ordinary game. Against him, the real player could only disappoint. Against the league he actually faced, Rookie of the Year, 2 All-NBA selections, an All-Star start, a gold medal, and 15 seasons describe something far more substantial. Detroit and Flint also revealed a person who did not fit comfortably inside the basketball verdict. His investments did not all succeed, and his community work did not erase the earlier disputes. Both still belonged to the same man whose reputation had been compressed into a single accusation about effort. A career can contain responsibility without becoming a moral fable, just as a person can contain contradictions without one of them being false. Derrick Coleman was not a bust, and he was not the best power forward ever. He occupied the more uncomfortable distance between those descriptions, accomplished enough to disprove the first, gifted enough to keep the second alive as a question. That is why the debate has lasted. His best basketball did not resolve the argument about his potential. It created it. Every dominant performance showed what was possible, and every interruption made that possibility feel unfinished. Coleman could never outrun the player people saw on his greatest nights, because that player was real, even if no career could remain there forever.